Sandor Ferenczi's analysis of RN, a critically important case in the history of psychoanalysis. By Christopher Fortune. Part 2. The experiment in mutual analysis was paradoxical, a brilliant and daring idea, yet possibly a clinical mistake. It can be viewed from a number of perspectives. For example, Freud wrote that Ferenczi felt saved by Severn's analysis, Letter to Jones, in the Saw 1984, pages 180 to 181. For Ferenczi, she succeeded where Freud, as his former analyst, had failed. Yet to what extent did Ferenczi fall under Severn's spell? Was he so overwhelmed by her power and pathology that he lost his clinical detachment? By failing to interpret, instead of submitting to Severn's demand to analyze him, did Ferenczi undermine her analysis? To what degree did she influence his belief that his own deep-rooted traumas were the source of his psychological suffering? In the end, mutual analysis remains enigmatic and may have proved to be both a success and a failure. In his final diary entry, Ferenczi acknowledges Severn's support as critical in his struggle with Freud. My pupil's confidence in me could give me a certain self-assurance, in particular, the confidence of one person who is both a pupil and a teacher. P. 212. By the fall of 1932, Ferenczi was a sick man, dying of pernicious anemia. Severn herself was desperate. She had no money and was distraught, suffering from extremes of emotion as she reacted to Ferenczi's necessary withdrawal to conserve his dwindling strength. She spent another 6 months in this state of agitation and despair before she left Budapest for Paris, only a few months before Ferenczi's death in May 1933. There, she received news of his death. Shortly after, Severn returned to London where she resumed practicing psychotherapy. There is no record of her comments on the death of her devoted analyst who, she believed, had ultimately saved her life. Severn's third book, The Discovery of the Self, begun in Budapest in 1932, was published in London in the fall of 1933. In it, she attempts to integrate her earlier psychotherapy approaches with her later analytic influences, setting them within her overarching metaphysical spiritual beliefs. Although hardly mentioning him, Severn demonstrates solidarity with Ferenczi. Championing the primacy of early external trauma, she calls for the recognition of the dynamics of childhood sexual abuse. She claims that unsettling psychic events, such as nightmares, simply reflect forgotten facts, real past traumas, page 120. With this position, Severn appears to eliminate any influence of fantasy in mental disturbance. However, when she then defines reality as including psychic reality, pages 120 to 121, intentionally or not, she posits a more complex psychic relationship between reality and fantasy. Professionally, the book made little impact. In London in the 1930s, Severn was not active in psychoanalytic circles. She did, however, participate in the Practical Psychology Club and resumed her association with the metaphysical community. In 1939, Severn returned to New York, where she lived and practiced until her death in 1959 at 79 years of age. Her status as a lay analyst, her lack of academic credentials, her own history of mental instability, and the shadow of controversy over Ferenczi's last work, and possibly even her own unvoiced sense of responsibility for his exhaustion and death, no doubt contributed to her professional psychoanalytic isolation. Until recently, Severn has been a mysterious figure in psychoanalysis. The few, often veiled, references to her have frequently conveyed suspicion, even hostility, regarding her relationship with Ferenczi. The most notable example is Freud's May 29, 1933 letter to Ernest Jones, in which he discusses Ferenczi a week after his death, Masson 1984, pages 180 to 181, my italics. Ferenczi held the conviction that I did not love him enough, that I did not want to recognize his works, and also that I had badly analyzed him. His innovations in technique were connected with this, since he wanted to show me how lovingly one must treat one's patients in order to help them. In fact, these were regressions to the complexes of his childhood. He would himself become a better mother, and in fact found the children he needed. Among them was a suspect American woman, to whom he devoted 4 or 5 hours a day, Mrs. Severn. When she left, he believed that she could influence him through vibrations sent across the ocean. He said that she analyzed him, and thereby saved him. So he played both roles, was both the mother and the child. She seems to have produced in him a pseudologia fantastica, since he believed her accounts of the most strange childhood traumas, which he then defended against us. In these disorders was snuffed out his once so brilliant intelligence. But let us preserve his sad exit as a secret among ourselves. In his book The Basic Fault, Ferenczi's executor, Michael Ballant, 1968, characterized Ferenczi's intense work with an unnamed female patient, identified here as Elizabeth Severn, as a grand experiment, perhaps the first of its kind in analytic history. p. 112. Elizabeth Severn is one of a number of historical patients, mostly women, whose contributions to the development of psychoanalysis have recently been brought to light and re-evaluated. Ellenberger 1991, Kerr 1988, Shamdasani 1990, Swales 1986. For example, Martin Stanton, 1991, credits Severn's influence in Ferenczi's emphasis in trauma on his later technical developments, specifically the relaxation principle, and on his insights into countertransference. Furthermore, Wallstan, 1989, believes that, in leading Ferenczi to recognize the clinical importance of countertransference, Severn, along with Brewer's Anna Zero and Freud's Dora, represents one of the landmark cases in psychoanalytic therapy. p. 676. Conclusion. The relationship between Elizabeth Severn and Sandor Ferenczi was complex, problematic, and historic. Through it, Sandor Ferenczi was led to question the foundations of psychoanalysis and to challenge his longtime mentor, Sigmund Freud. In so doing, he expanded the frontiers of psychoanalytic theory and technique. Elizabeth Severn, as RN, may well be one of the most important patients in the history of psychoanalysis. Although not the first sexually abused patient to be analyzed, she was, for her time, the most extensively treated one. Her desperate attempt to piece together a cohesive identity from a self shattered by her seemingly horrendous childhood experiences induced Ferenczi to risk radical technical experiments with her and with himself that uncovered unique clinical material probably unavailable to classical analytical technique of the time. The resulting insights were the prime source for Ferenczi's 1932-1933 early understanding of the dynamics of sexual trauma, initial shock, denial, by adults, identification with the aggressor, fragmentation, amnesia, and body memory, which have only in recent years been recognized by the profession. In addition, through Ferenczi's diary, Elizabeth Severn's case continues to offer significant insights into current theoretical and clinical issues in sexual abuse, regression, dissociation, and multiple personality, for example, as well as the recovery of early trauma. Through all his later cases, but particularly through his treatment of Severn, Ferenczi gained new technical perspectives, many of which are currently the subject of lively debate within psychoanalysis. Ferenczi stressed reliving, not just remembering, the early trauma within the analytical relationship. As a result, he raised the therapeutic significance of this relationship itself. He took seriously the idea that patient resistance and analytical impasses could be a function of countertransference. Furthermore, he anticipated the current study of the role of the analyst's personality, of analyst subjectivity, and of the benefits and risks of countertransference interpretations and disclosures. At the Wiesbaden Congress in 1932, Ferenczi presented his revolutionary paper, Confusion of Tongues Between Adults and the Child, 1933, containing many ideas from his groundbreaking work with Elizabeth Severn. He charged psychoanalysis with overemphasizing fantasy, affirmed that sexual trauma as the pathogenic factor cannot be valued highly enough, page 161, and called for reforms in analytic therapy. The paper was dismissed by the psychoanalytic community. 9 months later, Ferenczi was dead. Since he left no method and no school, much of his radical work was left suspended for over 50 years, only recently coming to light with the publication of his clinical diary. The diary also reveals Elizabeth Severn's critical importance and provides the opportunity to assess more properly her influential role in the development of Ferenczi's last ideas.